A 3D anamorphic screen is when they wrap a screen around the corner of a building and then there's some 3D shit coming out of that screen, and this creates a pretty cool visual illusion from people standing on the street looking at this screen. And I'm going to show you how you can do that today on Blender. We're going to make this pretty cool looking animation today. This video is sponsored by my own premium product animation course because I don't do sponsorships because I'm not a fucking sellout. So if you want to learn more about product animation in Blender, if you want to be able to make a cool commercial like this one right here, and it's also going to be something that we're going to use in this video, then go check that out. There's a link for that in the description. Now I'm going to shut up. Let's start the video. Okay, the first step is we have to set up the screen and we have to place the camera into the ideal viewer position. Now this is just a project which I made for my portfolio, but if you did this for a client or if you did this for a screen which actually exists in real life, then you would have to pay very close attention to the dimensions of that screen, to the radius of the curvature if there's any curvature. You would have to make sure that you place the camera exactly where it's supposed to be placed according to the instructions of your client. In this case, I'm just going to wing it because I'm just doing this for my portfolio, so I'm just going to do what I think looks best. We're going to take this default cube, and first I'm going to move it by 1 meter up on the z-axis just to make sure that it's sitting on top of its origin exactly in the middle of the world. And then before we start shaping the screen and before we lift the screen up into the air, I'll make sure my camera is placed correctly. So I'll take my camera here, I'll move my view down close to the ground like this, and with Control-Alt-0 we're going to align the camera with our view. Now you want to make sure that the camera is at the right height, so you want this to be the average height of the person in whatever country this screen is going to be placed in. So to set that up, you press N to open up this transform menu on the side, and then you just set the z-axis location to 175 or 165 or whatever the eyeball height of the average person is. And now we can lift the screen up, so we can lift it up by, let's say, 5 meters, and then we want to make this as big as possible. And by the way, if you're going to do this for a client or for a real project, you want to make sure that your resolution is really high. By default it's just 1080p. You want to at least double that if you're doing this for real. You want to make this 4K. I'm just going to go with 1080p because I don't want to sit here all day watching this render. But let's take the cube, let's scale it up by, let's say, a factor of 3, and then in wireframe view we're going to take this face in the back, we're going to move that backwards by, I don't know, what's that, 6-7 meters. After that we're going to take the other face back here and we're going to move that even further back. So something like this looks pretty good to me. It doesn't really matter what the exact dimensions are for me. And now we want to take this edge over here and I want to make a bevel here. Now to keep things simple, you want to have a bevel here which has a number of segments which 90 is divisible by. So when you create this bevel, you can control the number of segments over here. So 90 is divisible by, for example, 15. And the reason I'm using a number which 90 is divisible by is because we got a right angle here, so that's 90 degrees. And by adding 15 segments to this bevel, we're dividing that 90 degrees by exactly 15, which is a whole number. So that gives us 6 degrees per segment, which is just going to make it a little bit easier to unwrap this later on. It's going to be a lot easier if we have to type in the number 6 15 times than if we have to type in a number like 3.758271 27 times. Anyway, you're going to see what I'm talking about later, but for now this is going to be the shape of our screen. And now very importantly, we have to make some more loop cuts on this shape. So over here we're going to add enough loop cuts so that the faces here are approximately the same width as the faces on the bevel right here. And then we're going to do the same thing on the other side over here. So that's a whole bunch of loop cuts. It doesn't have to be exact as long as they look roughly the same. And then of course we also want to add some loop cuts this way, but before we do that, I don't want these loop cuts to go all around this shape. So instead I'll just take this surface like this and I'll separate that to a new object. And now I can add my loop cuts to turn this into little squares. That's just going to make the projection a little bit cleaner down the line once we start rendering this footage. So now this is the screen onto which we're going to later on render this footage. We're going to duplicate this and move it down here to get it out of the way. And this one we're going to use to create the frame for this anamorphic animation. So I'm going to select this square here. So that's 3 squares right, 3 squares down. So I got 2 faces here and here. So I select this one and then Control Shift select this one over here. And as you can see, that selects this surface now. So I can go Extrude Alt S. That's just going to push it inwards a little bit. Down here I'm going to check even offset, and that gives me this pretty frame. So now I can delete these faces. I think I'll undo a couple of steps because I want to make this a little bit thicker. And now we got our frame ready to go. This is really important because this frame here is going to allow us to make it look like there's something coming out of the screen. And this is the type of shit that makes people pull out their camera and film it when they're out on the street, because it can look pretty freaky when there's something reaching out of the fucking screen. Anyway, this room needs to be a lot bigger, so I want to make it so I can't see these walls here. So I'll take this face, I'll throw it way back like this. Then I'll take this face, I'll also throw it into the background until I can't see the wall. And then just for lighting and reflection purposes, I'm going to take this edge back here and I'm going to bevel that. You want want to make sure that you still can see the wall when you make this bevel, so something like this will do. And it's just going to allow me to create a nice lighting gradient over there in the background. Now here's another pretty important thing. I don't want to see the sides over here. I just want to see what's inside the frame. And to do that, I'm going to select this outline around the frame. We're going to duplicate that to a new object and separate it with P. And then I want to take the edges from the bottom and also the edges from the top. We extrude those, we scale them up to create this wall on the top and the bottom. And then we do the same thing over here on the sides like this. And here we're going to use something called the Holdout shader. A Holdout shader is a shader which makes it so that you can't see any object behind a specific object. So anything behind this object is going to just be replaced with a transparent background. Check this out. We're going to go to the render view, and currently you can see the frame and you can also see this wall here, but my background is transparent. If your background isn't transparent, it's because you got to go over here to render properties. You're going to scroll down to film. You open up the film section, and in the film section you're going to find transparent right here. When you check that, your background becomes transparent. But now you select the wall, you go to the materials. We're going to add a new material just for this wall, and we can name that Holdout. And down here in the surface, you're going to replace the principled BSDF with a Holdout shader here. And now as you can see, anything behind this wall instantly becomes invisible. You just want to make sure that it's not clipping through any walls, because then that wall is not going to be invisible. It's pretty cool because now you can add whatever kind of shape you want, and that's just going to create a transparent hole in your scene. I didn't know about this Holdout shader until recently, and I also have a feeling that most people don't know about this. I'm just curious, so let me know in the comments whether or not you knew about the Holdout shader before I showed it to you today. It's one of those things where I've been using this fucking program for 15 years and I still had no idea that this shit even existed. So now we got the basic scene ready to go. Now we can start working on the materials and the lights and all that shit that's gonna start making this look a little bit prettier. So here's how I want to set up my materials and lights. First, I'm going to take this material which we currently have on the frame. We're going to name this material frame, and I'm going to make that black. I'm going to make it metallic, and I'm going to turn the roughness down to almost 0. Then I'm going to take this other object where we got the ceiling and we got the walls. We're going to remove the frame material from here because we don't need it. I'm going to add one material which is going to be named water, and then another material which is just going to be named wall. And that wall material is going to be applied to this background here and also the floor. So select the wall, select the floor, apply the wall material, and this here is going to be our water. So let's take the water material to the shading tab. And before we continue, we got to set up the lighting a little bit better. So get rid of this default light here, and we're going to click on that wall in the back to place the 3D cursor there, and then Shift A, add a light, add an area light. In the add light menu, align that with your view so it's facing that way towards the wall. Use G and double Z to pull it backwards a little bit. We can also scale it up a little bit. And now of course we're going to turn up the power because otherwise we can't see nothing. So let's do something like this for now. We're also going to make it blue because that looks a lot more beautiful. And now we got the lights looking nice and cute. Now we're going to set up the water material for the ceiling. So in that material, we're going to go Shift A, add a noise texture node, then Shift A, add a normal map node. You're going to plug those two together like this. As you can see, we already got some waves, but we're going to turn down the strength to something like 0.1. Then we're going to turn up metallic. We're going to reduce the roughness. I also think it looks better if we make it black or almost black. And now we play around with the scale. We play around with the detail level. We play around with the roughness. We can also animate this if we use our node wrangler. If you don't have your node wrangler, you go up here to edit preferences, add-ons, you type in node wrangler, you check that shit, and now you select your noise texture node, you press Ctrl T, and then in the mapping node you can play around with your location to make it look like the water's kind of flowing. And by the way, it turns out this looks a lot nicer if you take the floor and you also apply the water material to the floor. That way the gradient looks a little bit more interesting and detailed. I think it looks better. So now if you want to animate this, we're going to take the water material, we're going to keyframe X and Y location. So just right click here, insert keyframes. That's going to keyframe all of them at the same time. We got that keyframe on. So if you want to animate this water now, we're going to take the X and Y locations here at the same time, and we're going to type in #frame. This is going to insert a driver which is going to control this location based on the frame and the animation. If you just type in #frame, then every frame on the animation is going to be equal to 1 meter on this location here. So if we play the animation, you can see that now it's moving really quickly. If we go to frame 48, we got 48 meters on location. That's way too fast. So instead we type in something like #frame divided by 50, let's say. That's still pretty quick. It looks like we're on the fucking ISS. So let's try #frame divided by 150. It's still pretty fast, although you might find this cool, but I'm going to reduce it a little bit further to something like 350. I think 550 makes it look nice and calm, so we're going to leave it at this for now. I might change it later. So now we got the ceiling material ready, we got the frame material ready, we got a light in the background. Here's another thing I want to do for the lights. We're going to take this face segment over here on the inside of the top of the frame. We're going to duplicate that to a new object and then add a loop cut, delete all the other geometry except that loop cut. We're going to turn this loop cut into a curve. So select this edge segment here, go up here to object. You're going to go to convert to curve. And now this is a curve, so you can use it with a curve modifier. And here's why that's important. We're going to place our 3D cursor onto this marker right here. Shift A, give me a circle. Let's give that circle 32 or 48 vertices. And this is just going to be a little light we're going to have here so that later on when we add the curtain, it's going to look a lot more pretty. So scale this down. You're going to extrude it down a little bit, then fill it, then inset it, then extrude it up a little bit. And we can just apply the same frame material here, but on this face and the bottom, we want to have an emission material. So add a new material, assign it to that face, go down to emission. We're going to set that to something like 55. Probably we're going to need more than 55, but we're going to get to that later. Anyway, now you want to add an array modifier. So add modifier, generate array. You want to stack that. I think it's supposed to be in the negative Y direction, but we're going to see in a second when we add the curve modifier. So add modifier, deform curve. Target this fucking curve right here that we just created. That didn't work. We got to fix up the origin point. We got to place that at the beginning. Turns out the Y-axis is no good, so we should have just rolled with the default X-axis. And we also got to make sure that the origin point of the curve and this lamp right here are placed at the exact same place. And now we can stack that up. We can increase the count. We're going to increase the space between them a little bit. We're going to move them a little bit further along the line on the X-axis. I'm also going to make them a little bit smaller, so I want to have something like 15 of these. And then I need my 3D cursor in the middle of the frame like this so that I can take this lamp in edit mode, Shift D, right click. I'm going to scale it to -1 on the Z-axis while my 3D cursor is the pivot point. That way I'm also going to have some of these lights down here at the bottom. And then when I add the curtain, it's going to have lights from the top, it's going to have lights from the bottom, and you're going to see that's going to look pretty cute. So now the materials are ready, the lights are ready, everything looks nice and pretty. Now we're going to move on to the next part where we're going to do the curtain. So check this out. Now to make this curtain, we're also going to have to use a curve. The curve is going to have to be exactly the same as the curve we have here for the lights, but I don't want to use this same object because I might have to place them differently. So I'll just duplicate this and I'll lift it up above the frame to around here somewhere, just for the sake of clarity. And since we're going to have 6 million items in this scene, we're going to rename this curve here into a curtain curve. And then the curve down here at the bottom is going to be called curve light. You probably want to use the word curve first just to make it a little bit more organized. And now we're going to go down to where we have this screen which we duplicated in the beginning. We're going to duplicate that again and bring it up here. This is the object which we're going to use for the curtain. We're going to trim that a little bit, so you want to delete some of the vertices which are on the top and the bottom. And also we're going to take this, we're going to use Alt S to deflate it so it's inside this frame. Well, we don't need this part, we just need a flat surface which is going to follow the curve. So we're going to cut off everything here from the bevel on. And of course you have to make this longer, so we can just duplicate it and mirror it over here to this side. We should probably do that one more time. And now first of all we have to make this object follow the curve. So the origin of the curtain curve is up here. The origin of this curve is going to be located on this corner. If you don't know how to place the origin, you place a 3D cursor onto a piece of geometry, then you go up here to object, set origin, origin to 3D cursor, and then we're going to snap that shit onto the curve so they're exactly in the same place so we don't get that deformation. I don't want this thing shooting all over the place. You know how these curve modifiers tend to do. And now you select the curtain, go add modifier, deform curve. We're going to target the curtain curve up here. It looks like we got to rotate this by 90 degrees around the Z-axis for it to work properly, and now you can move it along the Z-axis to move it along this curtain rail. I still gotta make it a little bit longer, so I'm gonna take some more geometry over here from the end. We're gonna duplicate that, we're gonna bring it over here to the end again, and now the curtain covers pretty much the entire frame. You want to make sure you don't have any gaps, you want to make sure that it covers everything properly. And now that we got that going for us, now we can make the cloth simulation. So you're gonna go over here to your physics settings down here, you're gonna click on cloth. That's gonna turn this object into a cloth, but first you gotta make sure that you're on frame 0 in your animation. Now watch what happens if you play the animation. It's just gonna fall straight down, but we don't want that. We want it to hold on to the curve up here. So go to edit mode, select this edge loop at the top, then go to your data properties here. In vertex groups, click on this plus. You're gonna assign that to this edge loop at the top, and this is gonna be our pin group. So this is gonna be the group which is gonna stay fixed in place. So now you go back to your physics settings. In your physics settings, you scroll down here to shape, and in shape you're gonna find pin group here. Just select this group which we just created, and now you're gonna see that the curtain stays in place. It doesn't look like cloth right now because it's not moving anywhere. There's no forces interacting with this. If you want to see it look like a cloth, you can try adding a force field. So we can go Shift A, force field, give me some wind, which we're going to point in that direction there. Let's also turn up the power, and now if you play this, you're going to see that this is kind of flowing like a cloth. So now this is a cloth, but it's still fixed onto the curve above, which means we can keyframe that shit. So on frame, let's say 20, we're going to create a keyframe location rotation, and then on frame 50, we're going to move it back along the x-axis. You can't see see it right now because of some baking settings for the timeline. But anyway, you want to just move it step by step until it goes all the way back here so it's fully open. So again, keyframe, location, rotation. And now if we start from frame 0, you're going to see this get tugged in that direction. Currently it's way too fast. So let's extend this up to like frame 100 to slow it down a little bit. And as you can see now, it looks all nice and beautiful. So that's a lot better. Another thing you want to watch out for is this corner over here. As you can see, when it comes around the corner, this thing just shoots off to the side. We don't want that. So we're going to take some of these edges down here from this corner, and we're also going to assign the same vertex group to those vertices. I'm also going to reduce the weight here slightly so they're not completely fixed into place, but so that they stay in the general area they're supposed to be in. And now you can play around with this a little bit. You can try picking one of the cloth presets here. For example, you can set it to silk and see if it's going to look nicer. It looks a little bit shitty because the vertex weight is very low, but if you increase the vertex weight, it might look a little bit nicer, as you can see right now. You can also try something like leather and see if it's going to work better than silk. I don't think it works better than silk. Anyway, just play around with them a little bit, see whatever you like best. I like silk with a little bit more vertex mass better. And we're also going to go down here and in the collision section, we're going to check self collisions. Let me move out of the way so you can see this. So down here you got self collisions. You might want to reduce the distance to a very low number. That's just going to make sure that the cloth doesn't clip through itself or something like that. I think the cloth is looking pretty nice right now, but I also want to make sure I don't see this part. So I'm just going to duplicate a plane from our holdout surface, and I'm going to bring it over here to a place where it's also going to cover the curtain so we can't see that either. We're going to zoom in because I want to be precise. I want to make sure I don't cover any of the edge, but I want to make sure to hide the curtain. Matter of fact, we got a little bit of work to do because it's clipping through this frame here, so we're going to do something differently. I'm going to see if moving this plane backwards in edit mode a little bit is going to fix it so it's more inside the frame. You can see now we got a little bit more space between the curtain and the frame, so if we play it, it doesn't look as bad. I think it's pretty good. So now the curtain's ready. Let's just take care of the texture. Here's how I made the texture. I hit Google, I typed in Oral-B logo. The first picture that comes up has a super high resolution and a transparent background, so right click, we're going to copy that. Now I want to make sure that I know the proportions of this canvas here, so I'm going to take a screenshot. When I take my screenshot, I don't know if you can see this because it froze my screen, but it tells me the size of the surface that I'm selecting. So it tells me 722 pixels by 164 pixels. Those are the proportions of this surface right here. So if I just multiply that by approximately 3, it's going to give me a nice big surface, which I can now create in Canva. And there you go. Now I can paste my Oral-B logo onto this canvas like this. I'm going to make it a little bit bigger. For the background, I want to have a gradient, so we're going to click on color, scroll down, you got some default gradients you can pick from. I want to have a gradient which starts from the middle, so I'm just going to pick one over here which I think looks pretty. I think this is kind of nice. We're just going to have to adjust the colors. So once you pick a 3-color gradient down here, then you just go back, you click on this button right here where you can control the 3 colors separately, and now you just want to play around with that until you get something that looks pretty nice. So I'm going to see what I can do. I'm going to set the sides to a darker color and the middle part is going to be a little bit brighter, so I think this looks nice and cute. It doesn't matter too much as long as it looks halfway decent, it's going to be okay. So now we're going to go to File, we're going to download that, and of course once that's finished downloading, now we go back to Blender, and in Blender we hit the shading tab. We're going to add a new material which we're going to name curtain, and then we just add a node wrangler, and in that node wrangler we're going to open up the image which we just downloaded. So I loaded that image in, but of course the UV mapping isn't done properly, so we're going to go U, unwrap, angle based. I don't know why Blender always does this shit to me, but it figured out the aspect ratio. It just stuck it all the way to the side. I don't know why the fuck this makes any sense. It doesn't make any sense to me. So now we gotta go to this 2D cursor over here. We gotta flip that shit by 90 degrees. Then we gotta flip it across the y-axis by -1. Then we gotta scale it up by whatever. Then again, we gotta rotate it because we got it the wrong way around. Turns out this curtain looks a little bit better if we make it a little bit metallic, and we can also plug the color here into the emission color and set that to 0.1 just to make it a little bit more bright. I don't like how the logo is a lot darker than the background. I also don't like how the logo is placed here. I want to place it a little bit more onto this corner right here, so I'll go back to Canva, I'll modify that a little bit. If you want to, you can also adjust this texture inside of Blender. You just go Shift A, add something like a brightness contrast node. You place that between the curtain texture and the principled node. Now you can adjust the brightness and the contrast. You can also add a hue saturation value node here, and here you can change the hue, so you can completely change the color of this curtain if you want to. It kind of looks like a Durex ad. So for example, if you set the hue to 0.51 or 5.2, it's just going to make it a little bit more purple, which might make it look a little bit nicer. So if you do make this more purple, make sure that you make the background light here also a little bit more purple. But our curtain looks pretty good now, so that's the end of that for now. Now let's move on to doing some of the finer details. Okay, this is where shit gets fucking crazy, because I'm going to show you how I made these little icons that are sliding across the screen from the top and the bottom. So we're going to have to go outside of Blender to make this, so watch this. So first I had to do a little bit of research to figure out what I'm going to include on these bars. I wanted to see what icons I can put on there, what letters I can write on there. So I went to Google and I typed in Oral-B-I-O, that's the name of this toothbrush. And then I just picked out something like this where I can see a lot of marketing elements. So for example, we got the logo, we're definitely going to include that. Then we got the IO, that's the name of the model. We got series 10, we can definitely write that. And I also found that a lot of times on these packages you will have these little icons which tell you the features of this particular toothbrush. So I figured we can definitely include some of those icons in our animation. That might be pretty cool. So then I opened up my favorite image editing program, PaintNet, but you can use anything else. You can use Canva, you can use Photoshop, whatever, it doesn't really matter. This is pretty simple. I made a black bar, and if you want to know the exact dimensions that I used for this bar, I went inside of Blender. I selected one of the surfaces where I wanted to have these letters running across the screen. Then I would go U, unwrap, angle base. That will give me the UV map of this surface. And then in my UV editor, I can just go over here to UVs, export UV layout. That's just going to export this as an image. And then I can use that image as a template to create this bar. So then I can just cut out this bar, paste it to a separate canvas, and this is where I'm going to add my icons. So I know this is the exact length and the width of this bar up here. And then of course I went back to Google and I copy pasted this logo into PaintNet into this little bar. So I got to shrink that down so it's the right size. You want to make it nice and thin. You don't want to make it too chunky. We're going to place that right here. Then I wanted to write the IO thing, which I couldn't find on the internet, so I just made it myself. I had to find a fancy letter I had to make it italic and bold. I had to play around with this for a couple of minutes. So for example, this one right here looks pretty cute. Then I just got to add a circle next to it. So then we got IO. Then we're going to type in series 10 or whatever. We're going to produce a couple more icons like this. And then as I said to you before, I found some icons on the internet, but this was just a picture from a box. I can't really use that shit as a texture, so guess what I did? I went to ChatGPT. I threw in the picture. I told him generate a picture of the exact icons from this image, but on a black background, and here it is. It worked pretty well. And I just downloaded that. I cut it up and I threw it into my little canvas over here, so you can see my icons on my black bar. I wrote up a couple of other things, then I saved that to my computer, and now I can use it as a texture in Blender. So now we're gonna go back to Blender, and I'm gonna create a new material for this bar at the top and another one for the bar at the bottom, so I can have different textures here. So add a new material slot here. We're gonna load in the frame and we're gonna assign it there, but we're gonna duplicate it. So this is gonna be frame top. Then of course we're gonna do the same thing over here at the bottom. So frame, assign that there, duplicated. We're gonna name this one frame bottom. And now we can control these materials separately, so we can add different textures to the top and the bottom. But the problem is we still have to animate the text so that it slides from one end of the screen to the other end of the screen. So now we're gonna need a video editing program. So I'm gonna pull up the infamous Adobe Premiere Pro. You can probably use any other video editing program to do the same, because we're just gonna use some very basic features. We're gonna drag and drop these icons into Premiere Pro, and now we just have to animate them so they slide from one side of the screen to the other side of the screen. And the way to do that is first we gotta decide how long we want this to be, or how quickly we want these to move. Let's say we want it to last 5 seconds. So we're gonna go to frame 0, where we're gonna take this item and we're gonna move it all the way to the end like this, so we can't see it at all. It's on the left side now. Here we're gonna keep frame position, and then we're gonna move it over to the other side on the other end of the animation, so here. And now if you play the timeline, as you can see, the icons shoot from one side of the screen to the other screen. If you think they're too fast, you can just use R to slow them down a little bit. Now I'm gonna copy this because I want this to happen twice. I'm gonna copy this and start the next one somewhere around the middle, so when the first one passes by, the next one also comes in. Then I just gotta nest these together to turn them into one item. Now I can export the first sequence. So I go up here to export, I pick my destination folder using this stuff right here. Then I just export that, and then I go back, and now I want to invert it because I want the bottom bar to go the other way around. So I'm gonna go right click, I'm gonna go over here to speed duration, and here we leave it on 100%. We just click on reverse speed right here, and now it's just gonna move the other way, so we render that shit separately. And now we got the videos ready, so let's go to frame top material. We're gonna throw in the first video. I got my folder right here with a bunch of icons and footage, so I'm gonna take my icons top, I'm gonna drop that into the top bar. We're gonna plug color into color. As you can see, this is an image texture node, but it's a video loaded into the image texture node, so it looks a little bit different. You gotta check cyclic, you gotta check auto refresh. Now when you play the animation, you're gonna be able to see this, but the UV mapping is completely fucked up, so we're gonna do that separately. So we're gonna select these faces, we're gonna go U unwrap, and of course it fucked it up down here again. So we gotta take this, we gotta rotate it by 90 90 degrees, then we gotta flip it over on the y-axis, then we gotta scale it up, and eventually after enough work, you're gonna start to see your icons on this bar up here. Now, of course, I also want this to glow so that I can see it better in rendered view. So over here, I'm gonna open up emission. I'm gonna plug this image texture node color into emission color, and I'm gonna turn up the strength a little bit. And now we got our icons flowing across the screen. Now you're just gonna have to do the same thing on the bottom bar. Just keep in mind that right now, by default, the frames here is set to 100 in this image texture node. That means that your animation is gonna play up until frame 100 and then it's gonna stop. Now, since this animation is a little bit longer, we're gonna have to extend this to something like probably 200 frames or a little bit more. And then once we're finished setting that up, now we got the icons flying across the screen. Now we got the curtain working properly, the lighting on the inside is set up properly. Now we gotta move on to the most important part, which is gonna be the toothbrush. So now it's time we bring in the toothbrush, which we're gonna put inside of the screen. So here's what we're gonna do. I got the toothbrush in another blend file. So I'm gonna go up here to file, we're gonna click on append, and that's gonna allow me to bring in objects from another blend file. So when we click on this, now we just gotta search for the blend file. For me, it's this one right here. In my object list, I'm gonna import the objects which I want to bring into my scene, and I'm gonna click on append. Now I created this toothbrush for my premium product animation course. It took me a couple hours to do so. I first had to model the body, then I modeled the tip, then I modeled the brush itself, which consists of a little bit of a hair system. Then I had to make the textures, then I had to light them up, then I had to animate this little screen over here, and then I made a bunch of animations which I rendered out and I put them together into a 30-second clip, and that clip is something that can be used as an official launch commercial for that product. So if you want to learn how to make that, if you want to see that whole process, go check out my premium product animation course. There's a link for that in the description. There's about 40 something episodes in that course. It guides you through the entire process, so even if you're just a beginner, you're going to be able to have a pretty cool commercial at the end of the course. But now I'm going to use that toothbrush inside my anamorphic screen. So first I'm going to flip it sideways, I'm going to scale it up, I'm going to drop it into my screen like this. I'm going to have to make it pretty damn large, so I'm going to scale it way up, and I'm going to try to place it inside this screen in a way that I can see the reflection in the water on the ceiling, because I think that's going to make it look a little bit nicer. And then I also want to have a couple of area lights around this toothbrush so I can light it up a little bit better. So I'm going to place one long area light above the toothbrush like this. That's going to light up the side of this toothbrush, and of course we're going to make that a little bit blue. And then I'm going to duplicate it a couple of times because I want to have a few more of these reflections. I want another one over here. I want another one in the front like this. So now I got 3 bars of reflection. And then we're also going to do another one behind the toothbrush, so that's going to light up the edges of the toothbrush. Now here's another really important thing I have to do right now. I got these lights which are shining on the toothbrush, but they're also fucking up the rest of my scene. So I can see these lights in the ceiling, I can see the reflections in the frame, and I don't really like that. I want to make it so that these lights only affect the toothbrush, and here's how we're going to do that. We're going to make a new collection here, which we're going to name Toothbrush, and I'm going to throw all the parts of this toothbrush into that collection. So I'm going to drop them in there, and that makes it really easy for me to use something called light linking. Light linking is where I can make it so that a light only affects a certain collection of objects. So for example, I can select this big light back here, which you can currently see in the ceiling as well. And if I go over here to the object properties, I can go down to shading, I can open up light linking. Let me move out of the way to make sure you can see it. You're going to click on new right here, and then you just drop this toothbrush collection into this light linking box right here, and as you can see now, it's only affecting the toothbrush. You can't see in the ceiling anymore. And we're going to do the same thing with all the other lights that we placed around the toothbrush, and suddenly this looks a lot better because now you can't see the reflections in the ceiling. Now everything looks nice and clean. So now we're going to animate this thing. Let's figure out how we're going to place it in its final position. In its final position, I want it to be peeking out of the screen like this, so it's not allowed to cross these outer edges of this frame here, and we want it to get as close to those as possible because that's what's going to make it look like it's sticking out of the screen. I'm also going to rotate it so that the brush part is up here. So once the curtain pops open, now I want the toothbrush to come out of the screen. As you can see, we got to play it naturally because otherwise the simulation gets all fucked up. But somewhere around frame 99, I want the toothbrush to be out here. So I'm going to keyframe location rotation, and then on frame 80, I want the toothbrush to be somewhere back here, or maybe even before that. So keyframe location rotation, or maybe we'll rotate it like this as well, so we get some rotation in the animation as well. Now you can see that as the curtain opens, now the toothbrush comes out. I actually want this to start way sooner, so as soon as the curtain reveals the toothbrush, I want the fucker to start moving. So I want the movement to start somewhere around, what's that, frame 31. So now if we play the animation on frame 31, the toothbrush starts moving, and it's moving towards the outside of the screen, and then once the curtain fully opens up, now the toothbrush is way out here. I also want to animate the rotation of the brush, so this entire time I want the tip of the brush to be spinning. Here's how we're going to do that. On frame 0 or frame 1, we're going to select the tip of the brush, we're going to press I, keyframe only rotation, and then we're going to move on to the last frame, or whatever is the frame where the toothbrush completely disappears from the view. And here we're going to spin it a couple times around the local z-axis. Let's say I want to see around 5 or 10 circles, and then I'm going to press I, insert another rotation keyframe. Of course I want the interpolation here to be linear, and as you can see now, the entire time the toothbrush is spinning, so that's pretty cute. Now for the next step, we need a little bit more graphic design to make the icons, which are going to be on the glass panels, which are about to slide down over the screen. So I got a new Blender file right here. I'm going to place the camera on top of the world. I want orthographic projection so I can render something in 2D. I'm also going to change the proportions here and the resolution settings. And then I'm going to go Shift A, image mesh plane, and I load in the picture with the icons, which we talked about earlier, which we got with the help of ChatGPT. Now we're going to separate these into individual little squares. We're going to cut them all up. We're going to separate them into separate objects with P, separate by loose parts, object set origin, origin to geometry. And then I wanted to make a little animation where they would start off like this so you can't see them, and then they would flip into view. They would stay that way for a couple of seconds, then they would flip again so you can't see them anymore. And to do that, I first used the black and white properties here to control the alpha, so the black part is transparent. Then I would also create a little bit of emission because I want this shit to glow. And then I would just flip it sideways. I would start off in that position, then I would go 10 frames later, I would flip it again, then I would keyframe that, then I would duplicate that keyframe, and then I would duplicate the first keyframe again, place that out here. And now as you can see, I got this little effect right here, which I'm now going to render out into an animation. I do this separately for all the 5 icons, and that gives me something like what I'm about to show you here. So for example, here's the first one. As you can see, I also made a little bit of glow. It shows up, then it goes away, and then that's it. So now I'm going to use this as a texture, as an alpha map on the panels. Let's go back to the toothbrush file. Here I'm going to select these edges at the top, and I'm going to separate them to a new object with P. That gives me this edge segment right here, which I'm going to extrude down. Now my statistics up here tell me that I got exactly 99 edges here, so that's 99 faces. So just to keep things easier, let's make it 100. We got to add one more loop somewhere. So we add one more loop, loop tool space. Now we got a total of 100 faces. We're going to separate these 100 faces into sections of 20 faces. So we got 20 faces right here. We're going to rip that. Then we got the next 20 faces. We're going to rip that again, and we're going to do that a few more times. And now I want to extrude them. I want to give them a little bit of thickness with Alt S like this, so they look like glass panels. Of course, I want object shade auto smooth, and this is where I'm going to apply the textures. Of course, we got to separate these by loose parts. So let's select one of them. We're going to go to the shading tab here. I need a new material for this, so I'm going to name this material panel 1, and that's where I'm going to drop in my first icon. So as you can see, I got the video over here. I'm going to check cyclic and auto refresh. We're going to plug that into base color first, but we don't want a principled BSDF node. We want a glass shader. In fact, we have to combine the glass shader with a principled BSDF node using a mix shader node. So mix shader node right here, and this video is going to be the mixer. So we plug the video into the factor, we plug the shader output into surface, glass into shader 1, principled into shader 2. Of course, we got to make sure to map this correctly, so let's UV unwrap this surface in the front. And now as you can see, the background or the black pixels are replaced with the glass material, while the white pixels from this video are replaced with the principled BSDF node. So I'm going to make this slightly blue. I'm going to make it glow using the emission thing right here. So now we got this beautiful icon operating on this glass panel. Now we just got to do the same thing for these other 4 panels here. Now once we got them all set up, I want to play around with the offset a little bit, because I want all the panels to start up here, but then I want them to fall down one by one. So once the toothbrush is through doing its thing, I want these panels to start dropping. So I want this one to go down first. So I'm going to keyframe its location over here on this frame just before the toothbrush goes inside. And then I want to move, let's say 13 frames later, where I'm now going to drop it down over the screen like this. So over here, I'm going to keyframe it again. And as you can see now, this thing falls down. Then a couple of frames after the first one is down, I want the second one to start dropping down as well. And again, 13 frames later, I want it to be down here in its final position. Then I want to do the same thing with all the other panels, but I just want to make sure that all the intervals are going to be exactly the same, so they fall down in order and it looks nice and clean. And now they're all falling down the way they should. Now I just got to adjust the animations. I want their animations to start just around the time when they're about to close. So for the first one, that's going to be around frame 304. So the start frame for the first one is going to be 304 here. And then when we play it, as this falls down, this little animation starts playing, which is pretty cool. We're going to do the same thing with the others. And once the animations are through playing, so for example, it's going to finish on this one here first. That's where I want the panel to leave the screen, so I'm going to have it go down the other way. So I'm going to duplicate this keyframe to around here somewhere. And as the animation finishes, I want this to start moving down. So I'm going to make another keyframe down here at the bottom where this panel is going to disappear. Now for the final part of the animation, I have to make an Oral-B logo, which is going to jump out of the fucking screen and it's going to do a little spin or something. And the only way I thought I could do that is by getting a picture of the Oral-B logo from the internet and then modeling on top of it to make the shape. There's probably a better way to do this, but I think it turned out pretty good and it doesn't take that much time, so whatever, we're good to go with this. And now I just want to bring this logo in for the end of my animation, so I'm going to have it start around here somewhere once the panels are out of the way and everything. And then I'll just keyframe it right here, then I'll make another keyframe where I'm going to make it do a spin and I'm going to make it come out of the screen to the front like this. So I want it to cover an area as large as possible, but again, I don't want it to go outside of this frame because that's the edge of the screen. So if I just make a couple of simple keyframes, I can just have it come out like this and then I can have it hover around for a couple more seconds. And after that, we just duplicate the first keyframes, we place them towards the end, so we just have it go back to the inside. And once everything is finished, I'm gonna have the curtain close back up again by just keyframing the curtain's position on the curve, and then that's it. The animation is ready. After that, we can go ahead and set up the anamorphic screen because we have to render this in a certain way so we can project it on a real life screen. So the next thing we have to do is render this animation. To do that, you're gonna go over to your output properties, set the frame rate to whatever. Let's do 30 FPS. I'm gonna do 1920 by 1080p. You can go higher than that. Your samples, you probably want to do at least 128 if you want this shit to look decent. It's gonna take some time to render, but it's not gonna look shitty, so this is the bare minimum that you have to do. And then you scroll down to the output properties where you're gonna change the file format to PNG. You're gonna enable RGBA here to activate the alpha channel. Pick your destination right here. Make sure you make a new folder for this because this is about to render out like 500-600 frames for you. And then just go up here to render animation, and you can wait for this shit to render out. It might take a couple of hours to finish. So once we're done rendering this animation, we just have a raw video which is gonna look something like this. So as you can see, it's just a video which shows us basically the same thing as we saw in Blender. The problem is that this is not suitable for real life use because this is just a flat image. If you try to apply this to a curved screen in real life, it's not gonna work. So now we have to deform this video in a way so that we can play that video on a curved screen in real life, and then it's gonna be suitable and it's gonna be something that you can deliver to your client or whoever wants you to do this shit. So here's what we're gonna do in Blender. We gotta first get rid of everything except the camera and the screen which we had in the beginning. We don't have to get rid of it, we just have to make it invisible. So we're going to move the camera and this second or first screen over here outside of this collection, which we're then going to make invisible. And then once we got that out of the way, we can bring back this screen that we have down here, which we duplicated in the beginning. You want to make sure to place this exactly in the right place, so it has to be exactly over the same surface where you had your scene earlier. And now, of course, object shade smooth, and you're going to have to add a new material to the surface. We can name that material screen or whatever. And once you've named that screen, now we're going to use our node wrangler, so give me Control T, and we're going to open up the animation which I just showed you a few seconds ago. So you throw that in there, then the image texture node turns into a video texture node. You have to check cyclic, auto refresh, crank up the frames value. We're also going to plug this color into emission, and we're going to turn up the strength just so we can see what we're looking at a little bit better. And now of course we have to map this properly because right now it's all fucked up. So here's how we're going to take care of that. You take this screen object here and you want to duplicate this just so you have a backup in case something goes wrong. You never know when something's going to go wrong. And we're going to go out here to modifier, add modifier, edit, and click on UV project. Open up UV map, just click on UV map. You don't even have to UV unwrap this, there's already going to be a UV map. And with this eyedropper, you're going to target your camera, and I want to adjust the aspect ratio here. So you can just type in the resolution of your camera and it's going to work fine. So now we're looking at this video on this surface and it looks all nice and pretty, but the problem is now we have to unwrap this, so we have this on a flat surface which we can then display on another screen. Now I don't know if there's an easy way to turn this shit into a flat surface. I'm just going to do it manually, and here's how you do it manually. We're going to go to this object data properties. You're going to click on shape keys once, then click on this plus again, and now with key 1 selected here, you're going to place your 3D cursor onto the first segment of this bevel which we created in the beginning. So in this case, if we zoom in, that's going to be this vertex right here for me, and then you're going to select everything below that vertex, so everything over here. And you remember how we had exactly 15 segments on this bevel? That means 90 degrees divided by 15 is going to be 6 degrees per segment. Now the first one is only half of that because this part over here is a straight line, so we just have to rotate this by 3 degrees. Then we place our 3D cursor onto the next vertex, then we undo to reselect everything, and in wireframe view we're going to deselect this part where we got the 3D cursor. Now you rotate by 6 degrees, and then you just keep doing that until you got a flat surface out of this. I don't know if there's an easy way to do it. This is the way I'm doing it. I don't know if you can unwrap this in a more reasonable way. I know I've been using this program 10-15 years, but I still don't know this, so if somebody knows, let me know in the comments. Once we got it all straightened out in edit mode, now you can just use this slider over here in the shape keys to control which position you want. We want this one right here. Now, of course, before we do that, we have to apply this UV project modifier. Right now, if we apply it, it goes to shit. So we have to undo this. We got to go back to our object data properties. We got to click on bases here instead of key 1. And then you apply the UV project modifier. And now it's going to work properly when you go to key 1 and you unwrap this. So now we just have to turn this surface here into a video, which we can have stored on our computer. Once we got this as a flat surface, now we have to render it out. And the only way I figured how to do this is to point the camera at the surface and then export that video. People are telling me that there's a better way to do it, but I haven't found a better way to do it yet. I know this kind of fucks up the colors, but I think you can still get a pretty good result if you do this right. So here's what you're gonna do. You're gonna duplicate the camera first, because we want to keep this camera where it is in case we have to change something later, in case we have to fix something. And the duplicated camera, you select and you go to view, go down here to cameras, you click on set active object as camera, and now this is your active camera. So now you go over here to side view, so you're looking at this surface. In this case, we want to do control 3, then we do control alt 0 to align the camera with our view, then we place the 3D cursor onto this surface, or ideally we want to place it exactly in the middle of this surface, so in between these two vertices in the corners. We snap the camera to that and we pull it backwards a little bit. Now you want to change the type from perspective to orthographic in the camera settings, and then you want to adjust the resolution in the output settings to where the camera aspect ratio matches the aspect ratio of this image in the back. So in this case, we increase the x-axis resolution, we adjust the orthographic scale so this shit will fit in there. And when you play around with this enough, you want to zoom in on the corners, make sure it's exactly right, make sure it matches as closely as possible. I know there has to be a way to export this more precisely, even though I think this works just fine usually. But again, somebody tell me in the comments if you know a better way to do this shit, because I don't believe that this is what we gotta put up with if we're trying to be professionals. Now you want to go to render settings, you're going to change your render engine from Eevee to Workbench. In Workbench, you change the lighting from studio to flat. And then on object color, you click on texture here. I just figured that the colors look slightly better in Workbench than they do in Eevee, even though the difference is probably marginal. And now you can play your animation, you can see what's going on. This is what we're now going to render and export. So go to your output properties, we got a resolution here, we're still on 30 FPS, just pick a destination folder. I'm going to render this as an FFmpeg video. I don't want to do separate PNGs because I think it's pretty simple, it's not going to crash. I don't want to have to compile this shit later on in a video editor. And then we go to render animation, and then we wait. For me, this part is taking about 0.29 or 0.30 seconds per frame. You know, truck drivers call this shit asphalt therapy when you're just driving and looking at the road for hours on end. This is kind of what rendering something in Blender feels like. You're just sitting here looking at what you've done, and then sometimes halfway through your render you notice that you fucked something up, and it's kind of like having a 1,000 kilometer trip in front of you, but you hear some banging starting off in your engine. As you can see right now, we got some shit going on over here on the side, so I'm gonna have to do this again. This is the toothbrush clipping in from before, so that's happening because I disabled this content collection over here in the viewport but not in the render. And once we're finished rendering this part, we almost got a deliverable file. You might want to do a little bit of post-processing or color grading to make it look a little bit cuter. If you guys want, I can make another tutorial about how I do that. It can make a pretty big difference because sometimes when you render something in Blender it looks kind of shitty and flat and boring. But now let's go back to Eevee here and let me show you the result. Over here we got our screen from before. We're going to remove the material from that, and we're going to take this camera, we're going to go back to making this our default camera. And now if we bring this screen back up, which currently has no texture on it, we can just add a new material there, new image texture node. We can pull out this distorted image which we just rendered from Blender, and then you just have to UV unwrap this the same way you would UV unwrap anything else. And of course Blender likes to fuck with us when we do this, so again we gotta adjust it down here and we gotta invert it and do whatever it is we gotta do. And once you display this on your screen, as you can see, it plays perfectly well, and you just have this flat image over here, and this is what you can deliver to your client now. Guys, like the fucking video, subscribe to the channel. I gotta be honest with you, it was a real pain in the ass to set this up, but I want to make some more videos like this as well. If you want to learn more about this toothbrush here, if you want to learn more about product animation and how to get good in general, then go check out the premium product animation course. There's a link for that in the description. It's going to help you a lot, and it's also going to help me a lot if you buy it. But let me know in the comments what you want to see next. Also make sure to join our Discord server. There's also a link for that in the description. Now that's enough. I'll see you guys in the next one.